Hello, I'm Meg Sullivan, the Board Vice President for Victoria Festival of Authors. Welcome to the foreign land we call Canada, Immigrant Stories, featuring authors Francesca Ekwuyasi, Mutonji, Jasmine and S.J. Sindu. Though this is a virtual event, Victoria Festival of Authors is located on the traditional ancestral territories of the Lekwungen people, also known as the Songhees and Esquimalt First Nations. We acknowledge the ancestors, hereditary leaders, and matriarchs, as well as the creators from these lands, and give thanks for the privilege of living and working here. We are committed to serving as learners and listeners. Thank you to our sponsors, the BC Arts Council, Canada Council of the Arts, the CRD, the Government of BC, the United Way of Greater Victoria, and Monroe Books. This event, as all of our VFA events, offers closed captioning. Please click the double C at the bottom of your screen to view captions. Please use the Q&A box on the bottom of your screen if you have questions for us or for the authors during the event. Our moderator will be able to get to some of those questions near the end of the panel. This panel is curated and moderated by Danny Ramadan. Danny Ramadan is a Syrian-Canadian author and LGBTQ refugees advocate. His debut novel, The Clothesline Swing, won multiple awards and was praised across North America and Europe. The novel is translated to French, German, and Hebrew. His children's book, Salma the Syrian Chef, won the Middle East Book Award in 2020 and is nominated for the Forest of Reading's Blue Spruce Award. His forthcoming novel, The Foghorn Echoes, is to be released by Penguin Canada and Canongate UK in summer 2022. Danny graduated from UBC with an MFA in creative writing and lives in Vancouver with his husband, Matthew. Thanks, Danny.
Thank you so much for hosting me today. I really appreciate it. Thank you for the generous introduction. My name is Danny Ramadan, and I am thankful today that I'm podcasting from the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people. Specifically today, as we are talking about a concept as elusive as home and an idea as difficult as immigration, I want you to consider which lands we are living on. And I want you to consider who has been the caretakers of these lands since the beginning of time. It is really important to me as an immigrant to walk tenderly on those lands as an uninvited guest. And I'm thankful for the First Nations folks, both as a community and as individuals who have been welcoming for myself as an immigrant, as well as my community of immigrants. All right, so I have a fantastic panel for you today. It has been in the making for months. Me and Laura have been talking, Laura is the executive director of the festival, have been talking about this panel passionately for weeks now. I'm so glad I get to feature four of my dear friends, all women of color, to be on the panel as we're navigating immigration, the theme of home, and what it means to write from our community to the mainstream community. I have four folks with me today here. I have Francesca Ekwuyasi. Francesca Ekwuyasi is a writer, artist, and filmmaker born in Lagos, Nigeria. Her work explores themes of faith, family, queerness, consumption, loneliness, and belonging. Her writing has been published in Winter Tangerine Review, Brittle Paper, and the Mahalat Review, Volume 1, Brooklyn, Guts Magazine, and much, much more. Her debut novel, Butter, Honey, Pig Bread, was a Canada Reads 2021 runner-up, was longlisted for the Scotiabank Gillard Prize, and was a finalist for the Governor General Literary Award, the Amazon Canada First Novel Award, and a Lambda Literary Award. Thank you so much for being here. I also have Mutonji, who is the author of Shut Up, You Are Pretty, which is released by Arsenal Pulp. It was shortlisted for the Outwood Gibson Writers Trust Fiction Prize in 2019 and won the Edmund White Debut Fiction Award in 2020, as well as the Trillium Book Award in 2020. Taya is the nonfiction editor of Feel Ways, an anthology of Scarborough writing released by Mawinzi House. I also have one of my dear friends, SJ Sindu. SJ Sindu, we and I go way back. SJ Sindu is a Tamil diaspora author of 2 novels. Her first novel, Marriage of a Thousand Lies, won the Publishing Triangle Edmund White Award and was a Stonewall Honor Book and a finalist for a Lambda Literary Award. Sindu's second novel, Blue Skinned Gods, will be published or was published in was it published? No, will be published in 2021, in November 2021. I just got myself the advanced reading copy, so I got to read the book. So now I feel like it's already published, but it's not. So get it soon. All right, a 2013 Lambda Literary Fellow, Sindu holds a PhD in English and creative writing from Florida State University and teaches at the University of Toronto, Scarborough. Finally, I have one of my dear friends from my time at the University of British Columbia, Jasmine Seeley. Jasmine Seeley is a Bahan Canadian writer based in Vancouver, BC. Her work has been published in the New Quarterly, Ada Stories, Cosmonauts Avenue, I'm sorry if I mispronounced that, Gist, Room, and elsewhere. She has been previously longlisted for the CBC Short Story Prize and shortlisted for the Commonwealth Short Story Prize. In 2020, she won the UBC HarperCollins Best New Fiction Prize, and her debut novel is forthcoming with HarperCollins in 2022. She was also my role model as I was going through university. So welcome to all 4 folks. Today, we are going to start with 2 readings by Francesca and Thea. And then before the end of the event, we are going to hear stories by Sindu and Jasmine. But let's just start with Francesca. I'm sure she has some wonderful stories to tell you.
Hello. Can you hear me okay? Awesome.
Yes,
Hi.
I can.
I'm so honored to be here. Thank you for having me. Yeah, this is literally a dream come true for me. So Danny, you already know this from the last time I saw you on Zoom. Yeah, I'm always thrilled when I'm invited to read. So thank you for the opportunity. I'm going to read from a little halfway through. This is when 2 of the 3 main characters, who are twin sisters, Tai and Kehinde, they returned home from living abroad. And they returned home for the first time at the same time. And they're attending a childhood friend's engagement party. And this is from Kehinde's perspective. So she's entering the party and reflecting on what it means to have never really left home the way that she and her sister did. Anamoya is a word I found a few years ago on a website called the Dictionary of Obscure Sorrows. It means nostalgia for a time you've never known. I scribbled it in my journal, and in the years since, when I started taking my art practice seriously, I would write it all over my canvases before priming. Because even though I couldn't taste the feeling at the time, I knew that I knew it, that I'd felt it before. I feel it again now, at Isabella's engagement party. I taste its full-bodied flavor, pungent and salty. It is unmistakable. I've never been surrounded by old friends and family the way that Isabella is right now, but I feel nostalgic for this moment. I'm watching in slow motion as Isabella, wrapped in a sheer coral maxi dress that shimmers as she moves, her afro a glittering halo, laughs and playfully slaps Toki on the shoulder. Some familiar faces surround her, secondary school friends with whom I failed to keep in touch. Isabella kept in touch. She tended to the garden of her life and grew a community that shows up to her engagement party and packs the backyard dense with swaying bodies. Perhaps this is what happens when you stay home instead of eagerly launching yourself into the diaspora and disappearing from everything that shaped you. You get a celebration, familiarity, home. Isabella spots us and exclaims, "Ibeji, the twins are here." She hurries towards us, hugs us, and ushers us deeper into the celebration. Taya's body stiffens at Isabella's touch. I sense it more than I see it. She is cordial when she offers the spiked zobo and smiles politely at Isabella's squeal of delight. Isa, this is my husband, Farouk, I say. Up close, I see that I didn't imagine it. Her hair is dusted with gold shimmer. So lovely to meet you, Isabella says. She waves Toki over. Tokumba Pedro swam with us at a koi club when we were children. Unlike most other boys in our cohort, he wore Speedos instead of swimming trunks. When he wasn't following Isabella around like a lost pet, he swam many laps to the deep end and back, while the rest of us splashed around the shallow end playing Marco Polo. He was such a small-framed, crusty-nosed boy. I remember towering tall over him until I left for Canada at 18. So I am stunned at the broad-shouldered, polished mahogany heft of a man that walks towards us. Toki is all grown up. Tokes, Isabella says, remember the twins? Of course. His voice is still slightly nasal, a remnant of the sniffly child that vied for Isabella's attention, but more assured. He kisses Tai and me on our cheeks with a distracted, long time, how far? Then he offers Farouk a firm handshake. Long time indeed. I smile and attempt to locate something genuine in the smooth skin of his face, the shallow curve of his distant smile, his commanding demeanor. It's not very difficult to spot a hardened person. Thickening one's proverbial skin can only be a natural response to the causticity that life sometimes visits upon us. But there is a unique type of hardness, a single-minded drive to thrive through whatever the fuck, to tear through whoever, to get what you want, that levels everything so that nothing is sacred. Someone else might call it sharp, masculine, capable of getting anything done. But I knew Toki when we were children, and if you ask me, something happened between then and now that took some light away from him. Perhaps it's just what happens when we grow up. Could he look at me and come to the same conclusion? Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Francesca. I really appreciate this reading. I just reread Butter Honey Baked Bread, honestly, and one thing that stood out the most to me is how much I was in love with Farouk. I just wanted to like hang out with Farouk and maybe do weird things with Farouk. But anyway, aside from my sexual fantasies, let's move on to Taya. Taya, my friend, it's your turn to read.
Hi, everybody. Denny, thank you so much for having me to the Victoria Festival. I'm so excited to be here. I'm actually back in Canada and I'm at my old school. So I feel very like, oh, we're talking about home and here I am. I'm going to read from Shop Here Pretty. It's my collection of living short stories. And you see Loli, we meet her at a young age and follow her for a few years of her life. This is the final story, but I promise it does not spoil anything. It's called Tilapia Fish. In the kitchen, my mother is dressing big pieces of blue tilapia fish, which she says was imported directly from the Congo River. It's late in the afternoon, and I'm thinking of one thing most specifically. How many men have I made this exact meal for? How many women? How many friends, lovers, acquaintances? How many people who had other people, and why? I watch absentmindedly as she beats each piece on the stomach, gets it with a small silver spoon and flips it over and over again in a pool of oil, salt, with a small sliver spoon, pepper and lime juice, sometimes rubbing her palm flat on the fish for added penetration. She used this technique on me when I was small, moaning with growing pains in my legs, and later did the same for my father when life got the best of him. We lived in a shelter on Victoria Park, Mother, Junior, and I, for months after we first arrived in Canada, experiencing our first winter. I would have been 5 or 6, and my mother was still thin and soft. This was before she began to lose her hair from the cold. We never experienced cold like this back home. We had forest fires, communal ovens for cornbread, outdoor churches, street killings. But the cold, the snow, the frostbites, these were foreign to my mother. Every word, every thought, every feeling would be hidden behind her pores. And when she'd begin to faint because of low blood pressure, it would be in the way her face would harden that we could predict a fall. In the afternoon, she'd sit in the common area, taking notes on the television. They were mostly infomercials and commercials and soap operas. She'd repeat every new English word she heard. Sometime in her sleep, she would say, we, or by, or here. She slept on the bottom bunk by herself, and Junior and I took the top bunk in the rectangular bedroom we shared. It had a small nightstand facing a window. It was through that window that we saw our first snowfall. When she'd struggled to remember where we were, when the snow was coming, where the snow was coming from, what country, and in what year the turbulence began, she would say in a rising voice, we, while looking out at the very window. That somber, she would say by, then calm, she would say here, repeating these words in no particular order until there was a terrible silence in the room. It was that way that we knew, and it was like that that I understood, here, we, by, words that meant mother, immigrant, fighter. She would take her children and hold them tight to her breast, take time kissing each of them on the forehead, repeating by, here, we. And when my father would come visit us at the shelter, before we could afford to all move into a townhouse in that small, tight housing complex on Galloway Road, again, she'd say, here, by, we, sometimes peacefully, sometimes sadly. With the flat of her palm, she would rub my father's chest, penetrating. We don't talk about this today. Instead, my mother asked me to come home for Sunday dinner. She tells me that I must wrap my hair when I sleep, that posture is important, that I do not need to bleach my skin, that salt and pepper are necessities. Chin up, stand tall, my mother says. I listen very carefully to the humming of the fish sizzling in the pan, saying, here, we, by. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Taya. I really appreciate it. What a wonderful reading. I just finished, actually. Shut up, you're pretty. I'm sorry, I'm like 2 years late to the game, but I have a huge pile of books and then I had to like fish it out. I'm going to ask all of you to join me right now. Thank you so much. I'm going to ask Ej and Jasmine to read later on. But for now, let's have some questions. Let's have a conversation. We all write about homes in the plural. We live on the outskirts of places others so nonchalantly call homes. We jump sides and tiptoe on borderlines, trying to find the balance between writing about home and bringing ourselves into it. Ej Sindu writes about home as if staring the reader down, daring them to read and drink the work in. Taya writes about home with sorrow, as if home betrayed her work throughout the pages. Francesca writes about home with smoothness, as if pulling the silk of your robe into her fiction, while Jasmine is writing almost in a burning desire to understand it with the reader. So my question is, did you decide how to navigate the concept of homes? The duality of being at home and being an immigrant or the child of an immigrant? Or did you let it lead you down the fiction like a strong stream? How about, because let's start with SJ, if you don't mind me putting you on the spot, my friend, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much for having me. I think I've actually never heard my writing about home described in quite that way. I really like it. But I think so my experience with home is as a displaced refugee. And I think that really colors how I feel about the idea of home. Like I almost feel like, you know, the turtle metaphor is the best for me, where, you know, I don't really feel truly connected to a single place. And I've moved around a lot, and I feel like, you know, home is more about where I can make community and where I can make family. where, you know, and chosen family is just as important, maybe more than blood family. So for me, the ideas of home are connected to community building, and not just community building, but also like how deep friendships.
Well, I hear the turtle expression. I think the idea that you're carrying your home around with you is a very interesting one. It feels appropriate for the conversation we're having. Jasmine, how do you feel about home? How do you bring it into your fiction, or do you find that it's brought on by who you want?
Yeah, I mean, I wish I had like a really intellectual response to this question, but honestly, I just can't help writing about home and about liminality and duality and feeling torn between worlds. Like I genuinely wish I could write about something else. Like I'm bored of it. But it's just, those are the stories that inspire me. Those are the stories that come out when I sit in front of the computer. And I don't know if I would be capable of kind of immersing myself into the head of a character who feels fully you know, grounded in where they are, because it's just not the experience that I relate to. And so yeah, I'm brought to the theme again and again and again, but it isn't something I'm like consciously sitting down like, time to write another immigrant narrative. Like it's just you know, these are just the stories that come into my head.
It's interesting. I was in a panel like 4 years ago, and I'm not going to say where. And they asked me, what is my next project? Is it going to be about? And I'm like, it's going to be about finding home for a Syrian queer refugee. And they're like, didn't you just write that book? I'm like, no, there's a million narratives like this. Let's, Francesca, tell me about your work with home, because you brought so many different homes into your novel. So how did you navigate all of those different homes?
I think similar to Jasmine, when they were speaking, I was like, yes, that's how I feel. It's just what I'm interested in, so I just follow that interest, and it wasn't intentional, and it's not generally intentional, but it's what I find interested. And I think as my relationship to like the idea of home or immigration or even place, I don't know if all Nigerians feel this way, but Nigeria is a country that lots of people are trying to exit, and lots of people have like, people who can afford it and manage it have like dual nationality or multiple nationality. So Nigerianness is very separate from the like living on it in Nigeria, like in that part of West Africa. And so home really, again, to echo like another panelist, SJ, it is like this thing you carry. So it doesn't really matter where you are. And so for the characters I write, because I'm just really interested in like analyzing people and being like, what makes you tick? They tend to also carry that idea of home as fluid and more about people instead of place.
I love that. I love that. And I hear what you all are saying, specifically when, as Jay said, chosen family, when you're saying it's about the experience and the relationship, specifically from the context of being from Nigeria. So I appreciate that. Taya, your writing, specifically Shut Up, You're Pretty, is based in Canada. The whole book is based in Canada. Yet there's so many remnants of being an immigrant. So how did you navigate that relationship with a home where you didn't feel settled?
Can you still hear me? Oh, it just cut off a little bit for me.
You're totally
I
fine.
didn't catch the last part of your question. I'm so sorry.
It's totally fine. I was saying that how did you navigate the relationship with a home when the writing feels like the characters are not fully settled?
Yeah, that was an intentional decision. I wanted to write about a person who is unsure if they have a home. And every new story sort of suggests a new form of shelter. And she tends to find that especially in the people that she's meeting throughout the chapters. But I was really interested in this idea of
you cut off audio-wise, my friend. I'm sorry. Your audio is off. I'm sorry.
Hello? Hello?
Yes, I can hear you now. If you can repeat yourself, that'd be lovely.
Yeah, I was interested in this idea of like home sort of being nowhere and also being everywhere this character is. But my thoughts on home has actually changed since I began writing this, well, since I wrote Chapter 3. And I think it's because it's becoming more fluid for me as well. I'm starting to look at home can actually be expanded. With Loli specifically, it was this idea that
So I thank you so much. I really appreciate, and I agree that I felt as I'm reading the book, as I'm reading your book, I felt unsettled. I felt that I'm questioning my relationship with home. So I think you were quite successful in presenting that character, presenting that feeling. My next question is about talking craft, because you know what, we're a group of writers of color and we never get questions about craft. Because we're always getting questions about our personal stories and personal experiences. So let's talk craft. How do you personify the concept of home in your writing, just in craft terms? Can you tell me what inspires you to create a home, and how does it play in your narrative? Does the home is created through a community? Would it have desires? Does it have an opening belief system or a conflict? How about we start with you, Francesca? Just to put you on the spot.
Yeah, I'm always so stoked to talk about crafts because I don't have a formal creative writing background, so I love to just say nonsense words. Because at the end of the day, like what I'm trying to accomplish with the story is to have just for a moment the reader kind of embody or like get as close as possible to this character's internal landscape. So however that works, if it's through like writing, trying to immerse a reader in a character's sense of home or longing for home or whatever, things that are helpful for that is just really mundane things like music, or I guess in a craft way, it's more like rhythm, right? So the rhythm of the structure, I don't know the technical terms, but like the structure of the story, like how I try to elicit rhythm with repetition, or mostly repetition really. Or even sometimes with like just signaling repetition without repeating things. And then that can also be through like the character's physical gestures, like a thing that they're doing. Yeah, I don't know if that makes sense, but
oh, you're making perfect sense. Yeah.
Mundane things that we do as people. Yeah.
What you're describing, just rely on my education at UBC, what you're describing is a spiral narrative. So basically you're just going into the same story, repeating it without actually touching the same spot again. You're just alluding to it over and over until you reach the spot. So that just says that you're extremely talented and with just bursting with talent. SJ, how about you tell me about how you personify home? How do you bring it into your narrative?
For me, this personification is really about like getting really intimate with details. I'm very much invested, and I wouldn't say I'm a place-based writer, but I'm very much interested in the details of place, like how a particular place smells, what kind of textures exist there, beyond just the visual, right? Like what do you hear at night when you go to sleep in a particular place? Like those are really interesting questions for me. And so I very rarely write about places I've never been to. I much prefer to really sink my story into places that I know really well. And because, I guess it's sort of a double-edged thing, right? I've moved around a lot, so like my idea of home is really fluid, but at the same time I've gotten to experience a lot of different places, so I'm able to sort of shift locations really easily in my writing. But for me, the craft is all about like, can I bring this alive for the reader in a way that they don't even need to be there, they know what it is. They can feel in their bones what it is to be in this particular place and be this particular character. And so that's really my craft concern when I'm thinking about place, when I'm thinking about home, is that there's a certain level of intimacy that is involved with calling a place your home. And I want to capture that with the right, like not all the details, of course, but the exact right details that will capture that intimacy.
And I think I can think of a specific example when you're describing in Blue-Blooded Gods, when you're describing the home of the 11-year-old main character. I forgot their name. It's okay. And I remember you describing the way the walls are built, the way the windows are designed and where they are in the wall, the way the roughness of the ground beneath their feet. So all of that really brought the place in, not because you didn't sit there and like describe in details, painting a picture for me. What you gave me is the senses that your main character is presenting, and that really established home for me. Taya, how about we go to you? Because I found that the surrounding, this setting in your writing was extremely fluid, and I was hoping you would tell me more about that approach.
Yeah, I wrote poetry pretty much obsessively before I started doing fiction and Show Up Your Pretty. So something I do a lot when I'm focusing on poetry is I obsess over a feeling or a moment or like just a particular space. And I noticed when my first early drafts with this book, it was so like one feeling, like let's say we're describing happiness for like 3 pages with nothing new really being added onto it. So I feel that I sort of employ that I guess style with Loli as well. Yeah, so with every new character we meet, she's sort of obsessed with who they are and what they look like, where they come from. And that becomes pretty much the entire story, depending on the chapter. And I love that. It's this fascination that she seems to have with everything around her. And yet she's not a very introspectful person. So I don't spend a lot of time being like, my feelings and my thoughts in Loli's voice, but it's very much, and this person stood with this particular way. And so that was really interesting to me. I really felt like I also wanted, same as Francesca was saying, to give the illusion of absolute closeness between Loli and whoever is standing next to her. And sometimes it's not even a person, but it's like a place. She moves around Scarborough with a certain curiosity. And I wanted to honor each new place with a certain, like, make it special in its own way. So yeah, I also wrote a lot of the stories that are very place specific in that location. Like I would go back to the Denver, I would go to a bar there and I would write about what I heard. So I put a scene in one of the stories, I think it's like the Olivia story, that it's something I actually just saw happen when a lady ran and she just like had really beautiful hair, and I was like, why is this so attractive to me? And I wrote that in my book.
That's amazing. Thank you. So yes, I have honestly, like, I write a lot about Syria and I write a lot based in Syria. And one of the things that I miss is the ability to just like open the door and go outside and hang out in Damascus. Having that, I think it's like I'm writing and the spring of inspiration is denied from me. Like I can't just go and get that inspiration. So Jasmine, I remember specifically that you had this short story where you described a party for your main character. And honestly, I remember reading it and being like, I am in that party. So how do you create that space? How do you create that in your writing? I actually remember like there was one line, and then he kissed me and I let him. Like it's so vividly memorable for me what you wrote, that it stayed with me now 2 years later after I read the story.
That's such a compliment. Thank you, Danny. I guess thinking about this question, the way I think about it is, at least for me as an immigrant writer, specifically somebody who moved to a new country as a young adult, because I grew up in Barbados, but I moved to Canada when I was 18. And I feel like it can be something of a blessing and a curse, because I think that I have like an insight into writing about Canadians and Canadian culture as an outsider, that people who are born and raised here, I just maybe notice things that they wouldn't, or that they take for granted. So it's almost like this anthropological lens, right? But then at the same time, obviously, there's just things that I don't know. So like SJ was saying, like, when you just don't know those really particular granular details. Like I was trying to write a scene once about a character who was in a high school in Scarborough, actually. And I was like, I've never been to high school in Canada. I don't know the way the lockers work. I don't know if it does in Barbados, the teacher comes to you and you stand up when the teacher walks in the room. I have a feeling they probably don't do that here, little things like that. I was like, well, I just can't write the scene because I don't have those details. But on the other hand, like there are things that I feel like as an immigrant that you would maybe observe, because they're just things that Canadians are too, they're just too close. They don't get that big picture view. Similarly, writing about homeland and the place that you've left, I think in the act of leaving, you then get a completely different perspective than people who didn't leave, right? Or who haven't been able to leave or haven't wanted to leave for whatever reason. I just feel like often what ends up happening for me is that I feel like I'm an observer and never a participant. When I go home, I feel like I'm not quite immersed. I'm not quite grounded. I don't feel like I'm quite grounded here either. That's a total blessing, because it just opens up this world of stories. But I think at the same time too, it can also kind of prevent me from really like grounding my characters in the way that I would like, in the way that somebody maybe who is writing about a place where they were born and raised can ground themselves. That makes sense.
That makes perfect sense, honestly. And that's something that I don't even struggle with as a writer, but also as a person. I remember, I think I was talking to Sindu one day in the before times when we could hang out together. And I was telling her that I don't think Syria, as I remember it, still exists, because I left Syria in 2012. And that country continued to change. It's not frozen in time the way it was in 2012. So that definitely makes me feel like I'm not going to feel at home over there, because life continues after you leave. You know what I mean? Anyway, I just realized that there are 60 people watching us as we're speaking right here, and I just started hanging out with my best friends. So I just want to say hi to all of those observers. Thank you so much for coming today. And quickly, there is a little thing down here on Zoom that allows you to write questions for our fabulous panelists. You can write your questions right there. And I'm going to dedicate the last 10 minutes of our conversation to answer your questions. So feel free to fill that Q&A with as many questions as possible, and I will get to as many of them as I can at the end of this panel. We still have many questions that I have. Yes, Francesca, is it time for you to say your goodbyes? No, you have a question?
No, I don't have a question. I just wanted to respond to something Jasmine said.
Oh my God, please go ahead.
Yeah, just the idea of like always being an observer and, never been able to like write from a place of like fully knowing a place. Or I'm not sure how you worded it, but I was thinking, I think that's actually an advantage, or perhaps like the gift of being a writer, because I often also feel like an observer, and I'm like, I just want to be the main character that someone else is observing. But I think the cool thing about that is you don't take anything for granted. So when you read a book and it's over explained because the person is like wanting to be understood and like pandering, or perhaps even when it's not intentional, the opposite side of that is like writing as if everyone knows what you're talking about. And I think there's a great in-between. I'm trying to find the in-between of like, I'm not taking any of these details for granted, and I'm not going to assume that you know what I'm talking about. I'm going to just like open the door. Anyway, I think it's a unique place to be, this place that you described. And yeah.
I think honestly, thank you, Francesca, and I agree with you, and I think that's very present in all of your writing. I don't find any of you sitting there walking the white person into your fiction, being like, here is this, and this is how it works. And I think that's the beauty of your writing. You don't actually, you're telling an authentic story, but also you're telling an authentic story from your own community, which brings me to my next question, unless anybody else has anything to add. Yes? No? Awesome, yay. So my next question is, as an immigrant, do you feel that you're carrying responsibilities by both your birth society or that of your ancestors, as well as your host home? Do you feel that there's a burden of representation of your home, of your community and background and heritage? But also, do you think that you're representing the story of those who you belong to, but also do you carry the burden of telling that authentic story to the mainstream community that might not understand it? How do you handle that stress? Asking for a friend. Let's start with Taya. We haven't started with Taya before.
I wonder how Francesca is going to piggyback whatever that to say. You know, I'm from Congo. It's a country that is very faithful to their beliefs and their traditions, and staying away from that is sort of a bit of a betrayal sometimes. So I think that when I first started writing, I was really, really like, yes, I want to represent Congo and everyone who's Maluba and everyone who is a refugee. And then I woke up one day and I realized that the world is a very big place to want to carry, and Africa is a very big continent to want to represent, and Congo is a very it's a very specific place to want to speak the voice of. And I had to sort of let go of this obsession of doing everything for everyone and doing it the right way. And I feel that now today I exist in a space where my interest in writing, my interest in creating art is a little bit selfish in the sense that I write to represent myself. Like the responsibility that I'm not holding is really, really just to me. That being said, I'm also a very intersexual person, and you know, everything about me will come out in my writing. I am a woman and I am a Black woman, and I am a Black woman who is also queer, and I'm a Black woman who's queer, who's also a refugee. These things will just be there. And the responsibility that I take isn't for all the people who might relate. It's literally just for me. If it so happens that someone interacts with my work and they feel like, wow, this person got me, I love that for them and I love that for us. But I try to go to bed not taking on that responsibility. And there's so many reasons why we can unpack why that it was important for me. The minute I began publishing, the minute I began doing panels and meeting other people, it was really important for me to get there quickly. One of the main reasons is I still have yet to meet another Congolese born author or person to this day, and I regularly tweet about it. If you know any Congolese writer, please send them my way. And like this is like my one tweet that gets like no like, which is ouch, you know. But it really forced me to sort of let go of this. I almost want to call it like savior complex, that if the more I write about my country, the more I write about my people, the more visibility they'll have, and suddenly everybody in America and Canada will start to care. It's not true. And at the same time, though, I do feel very like comfortable in this space of I'm going to do this because I want to, and I'm going to honor that that's enough for right now.
I wish I can be there, to be honest. Like sometimes I freeze while I'm writing. I'm writing a memoir at the moment, and sometimes I freeze mid-sentence being like, I'm representing myself here, but what does this say about the queer Syrians, or what does this say about immigrants, or what does this say about like there was a specific scene where as a 17-year-old I was in a relationship with a much older gentleman, and what does that say about queer relationships in general? So it's freaking me the F out, to be honest. So let's go to SJ. SJ, tell me, what do you feel about representation? Are you representing yourself, your community, none of the above, all of the above?
Well, something that Taya said really stuck with me, which is like when you're at the intersections of multiple marginalized identities, you feel like there's so many communities that you're representing that you can't really represent any of them, especially when like they are sometimes oppositional to each other. You know, as a queer Tamil person, the Tamil community is very homophobic and very biphobic, queerphobic. Not always, but in general. I mean, just very recently there was a queer Tamil couple that got married in Toronto, and you know, everybody who was involved got death threats and hate mail, and like, you know, it really was a traumatic thing. I mean, of course, to experience, but also to watch as a queer Tamil person, to see your communities like basically go to war against each other. And we all know that, you know, white queer communities can be super racist and very anti-immigrant and, you know, all of the things. So, you know, what responsibilities do we have? And I think that's a really hard question to answer, and I don't know if I can answer it. But for me, I think when I'm first writing, like when I'm writing the first drafts, I'm representing myself, and I'm not really like, I try not to worry about everyone else, because I would freeze, I think, like, and I do sometimes when that thought crosses my head, I'm like, oh, how is this going to be interpreted? But then of course, like, the reader is allowed to come into my imagination in the revision process. And, you know, during especially late stage revision, I'm really interested in how things will be interpreted. But at some point, in almost every book that I've written, at some point I hit this point where I'm just like, I don't care anymore. I'm going to write the story I want to write, and you know, everyone can deal with it. And I actually end up making things more queer and like more, you know, just like really leaning into it. And I think that that's one of the strengths of immigrant writing, is that we can sort of be chameleons. Like, we can write about Canadian experience, we can write about the white experience because we're like steeped in it. Maybe not like very specifically like Jasmine was saying about, like, you know, very specific like high school experience in Canada kind of thing, but like in general, I think we can sort of approximate it. But we can also write very specifically about many different things, expertise, and that is a strength that a lot of writers don't have. And especially when, like Taya said, you're representing a very small community. Like, if we're talking queer Tamil writers with books, like, we all fit in a very small room together, right? Like, there's not that many of us out there, and almost all of us have been on panels together, right? They're like, there's always these panels where like, it's like, oh, queer Tamil writers, and there's like the 5 of us, and we're like, oh, another panel, yes, together. Yeah, and it's kind of great for that kind of sort of like very close community, but it's also I think about modeling, like not just the writing itself, but the public persona of being an immigrant writer that is visible. And I see this with my students. I have a lot of Black and brown students who it makes a difference for them to see a brown person at the head of a creative writing classroom, where they're like, oh, maybe I can do this. Maybe this is something that I can pursue, just because there's somebody else who's already been there. Like, I don't know if you know this, Taya, but we like use you as an example in almost every class at Ekwuyasi, being like, if Taya can do it, you can all do it. Yay. And like, we're like, look at this superstar that came out of our program and like went on to do amazing things. And and as soon as like they see your book and they read it and they see your face, and they're just like, oh my God, I don't have to be like, a very middle-aged white man to have success in the Canadian field or in the American. And it's like,
Yeah.
it makes a huge difference. So that like that representation is big, I think.
I agree. And I also like, I feel like I am the only queer Syrian writer out there. Scratch that. I'm the only like recognized Syrian writer out there in Canada, and that's a very lonely place to be. I don't want to be that person. That's why I feel that responsibility. Francesca, I know a lot of folks from Nigeria who are fantastic writers, yet you stand out. So can you tell me about where that puts you?
I was going to say, like, I feel particularly, I mean, the first word that came to my head is lucky, but I don't know that it's necessarily good or bad, but like Nigeria is a massive, like Nigerians are everywhere. We're the most populous Black nation. So of course there are brilliant Nigerian authors that I grew up reading. They're brilliant queer Nigerian authors. So representation is not, it's not a burden that I carry, you know, and again, I don't know that is, yeah, that's just what it is. And so in terms of my writing, I think Helimeri changed my life because I read The Icarus Girl when I was a teenager, and I was just like, I've never read anything like this in my entire life. And then I read Mr. Fox and White is for Witching, and just like, she's just writing whatever she wants in a way that set me free. Because, you know, I grew up reading a diversity of Black and African and writers. You know, there's some genres that we tend to stay in. And Helena just burst that completely. And I have many examples like that in my life that have set me free. So I'm just representing my interests. I'm just like following my desire truly. And that's why I feel it feels quite surreal that other people are interested. And I'm so great, like I'm just like floored with gratitude because this book is weird. My stories are generally weird and very specific. You know, I don't know, maybe not that specific, but you know, I don't know.
I mean, if you're fishing for a compliment, you'll get it.
No compliment. Just I feel grateful that I can just follow my desire without the burden of considering representation. There's lots of Nigerian queer writers as well, and I think that's the point of representation, is that it gives you permission. Like, and I've gotten that because one good thing I can say about Nigeria, there's a lot of us.
I honestly, like, it just feels, honestly, because I've read a lot of Nigerian work in English. I think I have Mr. Fox on my shelf right here. I have Please Stay With Me. I have multiple Nigerian books on my shelf right now. And it's stunning to see that art has created the place where a specific story as specific as yours can also be celebrated by the mainstream community. This story is very specific, very weird, very weird is used here very lovingly, let's say, but it is very weird. All right, Jasmine, we come to you. How do you feel about representation? Can you tell me about that, please?
Yeah, I mean, when you were reading the questions initially, I was like, Jesus Christ, Danny, it's a Saturday afternoon. Like, I'm not in the mood for existential crisis right now. Like, no, because it's something that, of course, I'm like extremely anxious about. And I especially when I first started out, because I mean, I'm from Barbados. It's where I grew up. It's the only place that I know that's like was my childhood. I feel like I have every right to write about it. But at the same time, my mother is a white British woman. I'm extremely light skinned. I have educational privilege. I have immigrant privilege. I've traveled. So my experience, as a biracial Bajan is is very specific, right? Like, so, you know, I have to question when I'm writing these stories about Barbados, I'm like, well, whose stories am I telling? What Barbados am I showing? You know, and yeah, I struggle with that all of the time. But it's at the same time, you know, it's like what both Francesca and Teo were saying is that the reason why we have this anxiety and the reason why we put all of this pressure on ourselves is because of the lack of representation, right? Like tokenism is at fault here. It's not our fault that we're the ones telling these stories. It's the publishing industry's fault, right? So exactly like Teo was saying, I eventually just had to decide, well, my experience is my experience and it's valid, and my childhood was my childhood, and I have the right to write about that, and just to do so as truthfully as I can, and not put that burden on my shoulders. Barbados is a tiny, 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 tiny island, but it contains multitudes. There are thousands of stories to be told. Barbados is not everyone's Barbados, and all I can hope is that in writing about it, I now have like open up that space for more and more stories to come, because yeah, I'm just writing about my specific experience, and that's all that I can. I can't really put any other pressure on myself to tell the story of hundreds of thousands of people that live there, right?
I hear you. I absolutely hear you. So Francesca, I have one last question for you. Francesca has been doubly booked, folks. I am proud that she agreed to come and join us today while she is in a hotel room somewhere 4 or 5 hours ahead of me. So thank you so much for doing that, Francesca. So I'm just going to ask my last question, and then Francesca is going to answer it, and then I'll move on to the rest of the folks while Francesca bids us her goodbyes. And thank you so much for joining us today. I really love you. Thank you so much for coming. So my big question, just to end with you on a high note, do you worry about the white gaze? Do you worry as you're writing your books? Because I wonder sometimes that us as authors of color navigate writing to a society that is intentionally designed not to understand us or navigate us. So how do you write with the white gaze in mind or without the white gaze in mind? Do you worry about intentionally challenging that the way that folks, the mainstream society, the majority are looking at at our work, or do you try to hold the hand of the white reader through your fiction as you're introducing them to words beyond their understanding yet? Francesca?
Yeah, so again, I feel really lucky that I've had examples of, I have so many examples of that, like reading that and being like, I know what you're doing and I understand, and I just wish you wouldn't. And I have so many examples of authors completely just being like the other extreme, where it's like, I don't actually care if you get it. And I think for me, having an editor that I just respect and feel understood by helped me find a great in between. So I never ever want to pander, because that's just reinforcing power dynamics that like I'm trying to be like, no, we're all equal and all deserving of taking up space. So I don't want to reinforce that by pandering to the white gaze. I also don't want to alienate people who aren't me, because it's not just the white gaze. Like for me, it's also like the straight gaze, right? One of my main characters is a queer woman, and I was nervous to make her also a hedonist, because I'm like, I don't want the homophobes to think all queers are just like debaucherous, dishonest, terrible people. I'm like, so I had to be like, I can't care, because it's not that queer people can have pleasure and not be afraid, you know, and like similarly, Black women and Black femmes and just racialized femmes can express unpleasant emotions without that being like, oh, you're just a terrible, angry, whatever, you know. So being like, well, Black femmes and color are allowed to have rage and express everything, and queers are allowed to desire pleasure. Similar, like people of color are allowed to just be complex, full human beings, because we are. And so that's like the core. And really, I have a friend, one of my best friends, Portia. I just think of her when I'm writing. I'm just like, well, Portia gets this. And Portia's a Black woman. She's Rwandan. She's great. like, will Portia get this? Good enough. um,
That's a
I
good
just-
scale for me too.
yeah. I have to go, but I just again want to say thank you so much for accommodating me. This was completely my bad. I'm struggling to be organized. So thank you. And it's such an honor to be on the panel with all of you. Yeah, thank you so
Thank
much.
you so much, Frank. Thank you so much.
Bye.
All right, take care, my friend. All right,
Bye.
bye-bye. Awesome. Jasmine, let's go back to you after we bid our goodbyes to Francesca. How do you feel about navigating the white gaze? Do you worry about it in your fiction? Do you just move on? Do you worry about Portia specifically?
Well, it's Portia. That's funny. It's funny because I was just talking about how I'm such an anxious person when it comes to my writing, and that's true. But one thing I don't worry about is white people. Who has the time, honestly? I don't know. I feel like I don't know. One thing that I would like to have like tattooed on my forehead, honestly, is like, not everything is for you. You know what I mean? Like, also Google is free, but not everything is for you. Like, it's okay to be a little confused sometimes. It's okay to feel like maybe you're not in the loop, like as a reader, I love that feeling. I love that feeling of discomfort of like, oh, I actually don't fully understand this reference. And so that means that I'm experiencing something new. So, and I feel annoyed when I feel like I'm being like handhelded, whatever, as a reader, right? So I definitely try not to do that. It's funny because I'm in copy edits right now, like final copy edits for my book. And there's a reference that has been flagged by pretty much every white person who has read this book. Like, every single round of edits, somebody goes, oh, I don't get this reference. I don't think the lay person is going to understand this reference. And what's so ironic is that it's not even a very specifically Bajan reference. Like, it's not specifically, it's a reference, like it's a cricket reference. Cricket. It's a sport that's played, like billions of people are going to get this reference. Like, lots of Tamil people are going to get this reference, right? But there's this idea that, oh, it's not going to be understood specifically by this like white Canadian audience, and it's just okay. So I don't know. I think that I think she's not here anymore, but Francesca used a lovely expression when she said, you open the door for the reader, but you don't really need to lead them in. And I think that that's beautiful. I think that, we should be allowed to tell our stories as authentically as possible. And if we're explaining everything as we go along, that's going to take the reader out because, it just feels unnatural to me.
I agree. And I had like in copy edits for my next novel, I also had the same exact experience about the queer reference. So I was saying somebody mopped something and like cleaned it, and everybody who was working with me on editing is like, what do you mean mopped? And I'm like, that means stealing in queer culture means you mop it. So just cool and accept it, but it was hard. SJ, how do you feel about that? Would you like to add more to this conversation?
I think I decided really early on in my writing that I wasn't going to explain anything. And I feel like for white people specifically, and I feel like if I did, I would be a lot more successful than I am. Because I mean, like, it's true, like white audiences really love being catered to, and being, having the exotic explained to them. And I really, that gives me a lot of rage. And I feel really strongly about not explaining, like, I don't italicize my non-English words. Like, I refuse to explain. And writing in the fantasy genre reading in the fantasy genre has given me a different kind of perspective on like, the marginalia that we're expected to provide, because a lot of successful fantasy writers like Ursula Le Guin and Octavia Butler and Kay Jameson will do this technique where they just drop you into a world that doesn't actually exist. So it's like completely made up, but they don't explain anything to you. You just sort of
Mhm.
experience the world as if you're one of the characters. And so it's like, well, why don't we just do that and just drop the right reader into a world where they can figure it out? Like if they can figure out an alternate world fantasy with like magic and spaceships, they can also figure out what it is to be on the island of Sri Lanka. Like it's not that hard. It's not that, you know, it's much easier to figure out than magic and swords. So I believe very strongly in not pandering and just like, you know, sort of doing the full world building, approaching the world as if, you know, you're introducing it to the reader, but so like, you know, trying to weave a tapestry in a rich world, but still like not explaining things and just sort of dropping them in and seeing what happens.
All right, and I love that idea of like, if you can understand Star Wars, you can still understand Syrian culture or Tamil culture, whatever. So that's a great thing. I'm going to misquote you one day. Yeah, my friend, would you like to add to this before we go into our readings?
Yeah, I'm going to echo everyone because I don't think about that. I grew my high school for 4 years. I was in a predominantly white environment, and I feel like the second I graduated high school, I was sort of done with whatever manipulation that would make me more palatable to, like, you know, white people. I don't think about that whatsoever, but I will tell you what does. Maybe it's a little bit related. Something I do struggle with when it comes to my writing is actually the publishing industry. Like I'm just like, I'm going to write a book about a Black girl who is heartbroken, and it's going to be pitched as a Black girl who is traumatized, you know? That's what scares me. I don't really take on the fears that of things I cannot control. So I'm not gonna anticipate white people's reading and be fearful about that or let that guide me in any way. But I do find myself nervous about, well, when I get to the end of writing this book or this project and I'm ready to sort of give it to the world, how is it going? How am I going to be sold? Because I've understood that my being Black will lead everything I do next when it comes to publishing. And that's not a fault of my Blackness, but it's like, I'm nervous about what they're going to take. They're going to take my little baby and then they're going to decide what it is. And that scares me more. But I still try to resist that. And I still try to work against that. And I'm very lucky that I have a really amazing agent who I know she'll do right by me. So I'm lucky in that front. But if I stay up at night and I'm looking at my work, what I'm nervous about is really, what is the publishing industry going to do with it? Not what the white moms in the book club are going to say. They can say whatever they want. Have your Pinot Grigio, have at it. I don't care. But it's definitely the rest that I'm like nervous about. I don't know. Keeps me up at night sometimes. I hate it. I hate me.
I love that. I'm glad that we're ending the spirit of questions on Pinot Grigio. That's amazing. And let's get into some readings, my friends. I have the fantastic Jasmine Seeley is going to start us with a fantastic reading, and then I'm going to follow with SJ. Jasmine, when you're done, SJ, you can go ahead right after.
Okay, yeah, I'm gonna read an excerpt from my forthcoming novel, which is called The Island of Forgetting. It's coming out in April 2022. And I realized I didn't really actually pick a section to read that deals with home at all, but that's fine. Basically, all you need to know is that the main character is, she's a 17-year-old girl, and she's having this affair with a much older white foreign man who is visiting Barbados, and she's just like really down bad for this guy. That's basically all you need to know. Okay. When I enter the living room, my mother is eating dinner on the couch, watching the 7 o'clock news, and doesn't notice me. Part of me is glad. The other part of me wants to dance naked in front of the TV, yank the plate out of her hands, and smash it at her feet. Look at me, I want to scream. Look at what he's done to me. A few years ago, my mother and I went to New Jersey for the wedding of an old school friend of hers. We stayed in that friend's basement in Hoboken, took the train into the city for the day. I wanted to go to Times Square, but my mother insisted we bypass it entirely. We spent the whole day at the Met, my mother always a few paces ahead, listening intently to her audio guide, taking notes in a small journal she kept in her purse. After hours of following her from piece to piece, not really taking anything in, I stopped suddenly, my attention captured by a large painting of a young girl. The subject sat reclined with her arms folded behind her head, her body turned to face some unseen window. Her skin was yellow as if bathed in sunlight, and the white of her cotton underwear was visible between tanned thighs. A cat lapped at a saucer of milk on the floor beside her. I knew, without being told, that there was something wrong about the painting. And when my mother came to stand beside me, I thought she would comment on the perverseness of it. Instead, she stood quietly next to me for what felt like a long time. "What do you think she's thinking about?" my mother asked, finally. The question threw me. It hadn't occurred to me that I was allowed to have an opinion about such things. But I knew immediately what I thought the answer was. Sex. She was thinking about sex, about all the sex she hadn't had yet, all the sex she would have one day. How many afternoons had I spent in bed, the sun shining through my window in just the same way, exploring my body with my own hand? But I couldn't say this out loud. I was sure there was something wrong with me for thinking this way. At school, the teachers told us to let down our hems and pull up our socks, lest we distract the boys with our skin. The boys, we were told, were weak and easily tempted. But I was the one who was driven to distraction most days, my thighs quivering beneath my desk. At lunch, the boys shared stashes of playing cards with naked women on them, traded beer calendars and lewd magazines. I wanted to be included in their conversations, to put words to the great aching want I felt every minute of every day. In class, we read books like Green Days by the River and Catcher in the Rye. The boys in these books were obsessed with sex, with how to attain it. I was also obsessed with sex, but the girls in the books didn't seem to have much interest in it at all. They existed only as objects of the boys' desire. These girls seemed not wholly real to me, the boys chasing them around the way a dog snaps its jaws at a patch of sunlight. So when my mother asked me about the girl in the painting, I didn't answer. We stood for a few minutes and then moved on. After the trip, we settled back into our usual patterns of bickering and mutual distrust, the distance between us only becoming vaster as the years went on. But I think about that day from time to time, and I always wonder what would have happened if I had answered honestly. Would things be different now? Would I have finally gotten to see this other version of my mother, the one from my vaguest memories in the white sunglasses, cigarette smoke escaping from red lips? I've been with foreigners before, something my parents know about and tacitly ignore, but this time is different. This thing with Odie feels like I'm dancing on the sharp edge of a blade. The balance of power seesaws between us, and I can feel it slipping away from me. I imagine telling my mother about Odie, about the raw immensity of my feelings for him. What would it be like to share that with her? Would she understand how it feels to want something so badly? What would it be like to spit all of this wanting out at my mother's feet the way a cat gifts a mauled bird to its owner? Would she feel disgust, or would she understand, recognize something of her own feral self in me? That's it.
All right. So I want to just say that I am reading to you on the unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe Nation. And I think it's also really important for us when we're talking about ourselves as immigrants to recognize that we are also willingly or unwillingly participating in the settler colonial state, which is something that we have a responsibility to address as visitors and as people who are taking the traditional lands of Indigenous people. I'm going to read to you from my forthcoming novel, Blue-Skinned Gods, and it's the beginning, the first chapter. It's a very short chapter. The driver slammed the brakes, whipping my head forward and back. A chorus of honks crescendoed in the muggy New Delhi night. A few cars ahead, in the middle of an intersection, an auto rickshaw lay on its side, its 3 wheels still spinning, the metal poles of its sides cracked in half. Tire tracks swirled into a small blue car with its front end smashed. Glass littered the road, glittering pinpricks of light. People surged around us. My father, Aya, opened the door of the taxi and we pushed our way into the crowd. Aya weaved to the front. I walked in his wake. An older woman was sprawled on the ground next to the auto, thrown out as it tipped over. The auto driver was on his back near her. His eyes stared right up at the sky. Red slashes glistened over their bodies. People shouted in Hindi to call the police, call the ambulance. The woman was still breathing. 2 men tried to lift her. Stop, Aya said. He raised his voice and yelled, stop. You could make her injuries worse if you move her. He pushed his way into the clearing. I followed out of instinct, as if we had a string tied between us. I'm a doctor, he said. Let me look. The men put her limbs back down. Aya crouched over the woman. He opened her eyes and checked her pulse. She's losing a lot of blood, he said. She needs help or she won't last. Look, someone said. Kalki-sami can heal her. A man pointed in my direction. I wondered if he'd been at my prayer meeting earlier or if I'd healed him before. 100 eyes turned toward me. Yes, Kalki-sami, another man said. You can heal her. I walked toward the injured woman and knelt near Aya. Up close, the overpowering smell of iron and urine, and so much blood, cavernous slashes in their bodies. I put my shaking hands over the woman's head, where a pool of blood grew on the asphalt. I chanted over and over, my lips quivering with the words, Om Shri Ram, Om Shri Ram, Om Shri Ram. Some of the crowd prayed with me. I closed my eyes against the lights. I chanted and chanted, Om Shri Ram, Om Shri Ram. Thank you.
Thank you so much, both of you, for this fantastic readings. I really appreciated it. Jasmine, I cannot wait to read your book, The Island of Forgetting, The Island of Forgetting. Am I saying that correctly? Awesome. And SJ, honestly, truly, people should read this book. I just got immersed. I lived for it for the hour. I just couldn't put it down. I honestly just couldn't put it down. Awesome. So we have some questions from the audience. I don't think we have a lot of time for that. We just have like around 7 minutes. So I'm going to ask one question. And Taya, I'm living for the sunset that is happening behind you. I hope that you're not freezing over there. It's over now, but I have been noticing it throughout the event. So I have a question. Let's start with you, Taya, actually, with that question. The question comes from Sarah Isbister, I think. I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing your name incorrectly, Sarah. What difference does it make to have people around you who are from your previous or your original home? People from your culture, people from your place of origin, or similar immigrants who are coming with you, specifically when you are in a new place and writing about home. Would you like to navigate that with us, Taya? You are muted, my friend. Never a Zoom meeting goes without somebody saying you are muted.
I think they were trying to get me unmuted. Okay.
There we go.
I think that if I was surrounded with more African or Congolese people when I was writing my book, I wonder, I believe that I would have probably had a different effect. Thanks for that question, Sarah. but the reality of my life is I don't really have that in my life. So a lot of my interest when it comes to writing about Congo really is, a lot of it is like part research, part watching documentaries, part maybe finding someone online who's willing to sit down with me and talk to me about something I'm fascinated by. But I think that when you are entering any kind of art form and you want to make it representative to where you come from, I think it's so much value in having people like that in your life. And I do think it makes a difference.
Awesome, wonderful. It's, yes, I hear that, and I specifically right now, like it takes me time to like go to Google Maps, for example, so I can figure out streets in Damascus that I know by heart. I have to do a lot of research to look into places that that I lived in, that I know by heart, but now I'm losing the memory. It has been 10 years since I was there. SJ, how do you feel about that? Do you have a big community of folks who identify within your community? Do you feel like you are, do you feel that there's a connection there that helps you write, or maybe it stands in your way?
I think for most of my writing career and most of my adulthood and you know, adolescence, I was in the United States, where I really didn't have a huge community. I mean, I had my parents, and I would listen to their stories, and you know, sort of, and we never agreed on anything, but I still, like, I felt like I was unable to really walk away from my family because of the connection of place that we shared. And so if for a long time it felt like I was writing into the void, like I didn't really have that community behind me. And now that, you know, I've been in Scarborough now for 2 years, and it's very strange having so many people who are from that, you know, from the same place and from the same town, and who speak the same language and the same dialect. It's weird to be, you know, pre-COVID, it was weird to be on buses where I would overhear conversations in Tamil, like not just Tamil, but like Tamil from the very specific area that I'm from. And it felt like, you know, seeing pieces of home. But I think most of my writing practice is sort of separated, because I don't want to, I mean, just like I don't want to cater to the white gaze, I also don't want to cater to the sometimes very conservative expectations of that community that I'm from. I really appreciate it. I love their stories, and I like having that access to like go and ask my aunts, like, what was it actually like as adults living through this war versus, like, you know, I have childhood experiences of living through the war. And I can, like, you know, use them as resources, but I also don't want to make them feel like they have a hold on my writing, or that I feel responsible to them in some way. So I'm very conscious about maintaining that distance.
I appreciate that. Jasmine, I'm going to throw you a curveball if that's okay with you, but and correct me if I'm wrong, I might be completely wrong, but at UBC when we were together, I think you were the only Black woman there were in the cohort. Is that correct, or am I missing someone?
I mean, I hate to say like absolute things like that, because I just don't, I don't want to praise anybody. And obviously there's lots of
absolutely
online work and stuff, but absolutely. I mean, I'm in Vancouver, and there is not a large Black community here. It does exist, like there's, you know, but it's not, especially not Black Caribbean. So yeah. Sorry, what was the question?
So going back to the question, do you feel like you were surrounded by folks from your community? How does that affect your writing? And maybe do you feel that there is a community missing where other folks who identify within the Black community are writing for us here in Vancouver? Just to throw you a curveball at the very end of our conversation.
I mean, I think I'm extremely privileged in a lot of ways, in that one of those being that I did not have to flee my homeland. I'm not a refugee. I'm not a displaced person. I chose to immigrate here, and my father and brother and many of my friends and family still live in Barbados, and I go You like pre-COVID, I would go at least once a year, often for months at a time. So I'm still very connected there. I still have like my childhood bedroom, you know what I mean? Like it's everything's still there. So it's very easy for me to kind of re-immerse myself in that culture and get like what you were saying, like about stepping out onto the streets of Damascus and like feeling that like energy. Like I can go and I call it like plugging myself back in. Like I literally like step out the airplane and I'm like, oh, humidity, sunshine, you know? So I'm really, really, really lucky in that way. And I also just have like a beautiful community of people who like are always available. And I had several people read the novel, several friends who still live in Barbados read the novel just to make sure that I'm not screwing anything up. And, you know, I remember I had this scene where one of my characters is skipping class at school. I called my brother and I was like, if you were planning to skip class, like, how would you do it? Because he went to the same school, and he was like, let me draw you a map. Like he was so ready, so prepared. But yeah, I do think like I did write most of this novel in Vancouver. And yeah, I definitely had that feeling of, it's often like when in workshopping parts of this novel and also stories, like that feeling of like, yeah, this is not like, this audience is not going to get like a lot of what I'm saying. And yeah, and feeling like a little bit like, oh, like the token, like, I don't know, tropical bit of flavor to the workshop, you know, there's definitely that feeling for sure. Like it happens. But I think also, like SJ was saying, like our communities like can sometimes, there can be this like voice in your head, right? This pressure of like, are you representing us like authentically, or are you representing the best side of us? And so having that distance perhaps was also beneficial, maybe like the fact that I am writing so, I mean, I'm really far from home, so maybe that was beneficial in some ways. It's really hard to know, honestly. But yeah, I think as like Taya said, it probably would have been a very different book if I was writing it surrounded by Bajans and in Barbados and immersed in that culture, because of course it seeps in, right?
Well, thank you so much, Jasmine, and thank you so much to the three of you, as well to Francesca, who had to leave us early. Honestly, I could go on and have a conversation with the four of us forever. I miss all of you. I love all of you. I'm so thankful that you spent this afternoon/evening with me. And thank you so much to the Victoria Festival of the Authors to offer me the space to curate this evening and hang out with my best friends. And back to you folks.
Thank you very much for attending this panel, and thank you especially to our moderator and authors, Danny Ramadan, Francesca Ekwuyasi, Taya Mutonji, Jasmine Seeley, and SJ Sindu. If you are interested in purchasing any of the books featured today, please support festival sponsor and VFA bookseller Monroe Books. You can find the books featured during the festival in-store and online at monroebooks.com, and you can pre-order SJ Sindu's book through them as well. There are many more events during the festival, so please visit our website, victoriafestivalofauthors.ca, to view our festival program. This year, all festival events are available online. Our website also features Q&As with all the authors participating in VFA 2021 and a place for you to sign up to our newsletter. If you would like to support the festival in another way, please follow us on Facebook and Twitter and encourage your friends to attend one of our upcoming events. You can also make a tax-deductible donation to Victoria Festival of Authors through our website or on VFA's page at Canada Helps. Your donations help to keep VFA an engaging, accessible, and sustainable festival. We hope to see you at our next Zoom event, Maskatu Aski, a celebration of prairie poetics, tomorrow at 1 p.m. Pacific time. This event features authors Brandy Bird, Samantha Martin Bird, and Emily Riddle, and is curated and moderated by Samantha Knock.